Can a home buyer, once they get into a contract, just change their mind and walk out of the transaction? We are going to answer this important question today. Last week, we addressed the question of whether the seller can change mind. Today, we are going to talk about, can the home buyer change their mind once they get into a transaction and walk out? So obviously, the easy answer is yes. But there are several caveats. There is a lot of legalese, legal restrictions, conditions, and how you were represented as a buyer while the contract was being written. So these are all the factors that are going to determine whether you can get out, and it's even more important to understand whether you can get out while losing the deposit or without losing the deposit, because that's key. So let's first start by saying, in what conditions can the buyer back out of the transaction and just change their mind? So let's first address the issue of this changing their mind. The issue with changing their mind, it's extremely simple. Say I promise to give somebody $100, and that's a promise, it's my word. And after thinking about it, I just say, hey, no, I'm not going to give you the $100. I change my mind. But do you have the word promise there? Yes. And if you promised somebody something, then changing the mind is going to be not that easy. So it's just right there. Now, when you have a signed contract between a buyer and a seller, or that is what we call as the ratified contract, it means there is a promise, and that too in a legally enforceable form, on paper, mutually signed and agreed without any pressure from any sides, and they agreed to, one agreed to sell, the other agreed to buy the property. Now, with all that said, can the buyer change mind? Ideally, no one should change their mind. If you have decided, written an agreement, signed a contract, and the seller has also said, okay, I'm going to put the property off market and let you go forward with the process of buying the property, ideally, the buyer should not be changing their mind. But things happen. I have seen people just figure out or discover that, oh, I cannot adjust to the noise around the house. Or I saw that there was a death on the property and I didn't know about that. Of course, it was there in the disclosures or not there in the disclosures remains to be decided. Not just that, I have had a couple situations where the buyer lost their job. Now that's a legitimate reason that they cannot even afford a home anymore at that point in time. And so they decided to back out of the transaction. But there are legitimate ways in which the buyer can back out of the transaction, and these terms can be written in the contract itself, and those are called as contingencies. So typically a buyer can have 4 different contingencies, and I have explained contingencies in one of my videos in the past. So you typically have 4 contingencies. Contingency on the sale of your property. So if you're buying another property hoping that you'll sell your previous property, then that's your first one. The number 2 is property condition contingency. Now condition could mean crack in the foundation, end of life of roof, or the roof is leaking water, any of those things. Even I don't have enough light in the house coming, and you discover that after getting into contract. Maybe even that will probably count as condition of the property. Number 3 is the mortgage contingency. When you're taking a mortgage, you need the lender to approve the mortgage. And if that approval does not happen, you're not going to be able to get a mortgage. And if you don't get a mortgage, you're not going to be able to fund the property and close it. So that's the third. And one other contingency, and it's more related to mortgage itself. In fact, you can just have the mortgage contingency and not have the appraisal contingency. So it's the appraisal contingency. Whether the home hit the value at which the buyers wrote the offer. If the appraisal does not come in at asking price, the lender is not going to give the same amount of loan as what you had thought. So say a property gets in transaction at $1 million and the buyer is having an 80% mortgage. With 80% mortgage, they are going to get $800,000 in mortgage. But say the appraisal only comes in at $900,000 instead of the $1 million. It's $100,000 short. The lender is going to give 80% of $900,000. They are only going to give you $720,000 instead of the $800,000 that they were supposed to give you. Now, you have to fund another $80,000 additional in this particular situation. So not just the $200,000, but the down payment that you need to do is $280,000. If you have that excess cash sitting around, maybe you'll be able to pull the deal through. But if you don't have that cash sitting around, you're not going to be able to get the deal through. There are ways of mitigating this. I have discussed this in one of my videos about appraisal and shortfall, and in the contingencies videos too. So if that happens, then the buyer can back out if they have the contingency. Now, the issue that we are currently having in this market is if you write a contingent offer, most likely the offer just does not get accepted. And if the offer does not get accepted, you don't have a deal. So a lot of times people write non-contingent offers even though they know that there is a certain element of risk. Now, if you have that much excess money or somebody willing to help you and you are able to compensate by either adjusting the loan amount, etc., great, your deal will be intact. But if not, if you have a non-contingent offer, you cannot change your mind. Or rather, let me put it this way. If you have a non-contingent offer, means you told the sellers that you're not going to back out. And if you're not going to back out, then your deposit of 3%, which is typical here in the California and in the Bay Area, is at stake. You might lose that money and you could be forced to buy the property as legal performance. The max, but there are ways to fight this out afterwards, and that's entirely up to your attorneys to guide you through. There is arbitration, there is mediation, or you could finally end up in the court. Does not happen most of the times. Typically, arbitration and mediation are the easier ways to get through. And so, even though you can back out of the transactions, these are all the issues, or these are all the ways it happens. And one last thing, the seller, if they feel, oh, their excuse is legitimate, I'm okay to let them go in a mutual agreement. That's the only way it could be. The buyer could walk out without damaging or getting their deposit done. But in most other cases, you need to have a very tight contract written. It really matters who represents you and your interest at the end of the transaction. I hope this was helpful. If you liked it, and if you think it's of value, will help somebody, share. Thanks for watching. Hit the subscribe button if you haven't already. See you on my next one. Bye.